Please be seated. Grace, peace, and mercy are yours from the triune God. Amen. This Thursday was my 4th year ordination anniversary. The only reason I know that is because that morning it popped up on my Facebook feed as a memory. So naturally, I have been thinking about these last 4 years, my journey to ordained leadership in the church and the church's place in the world today. What a strange journey. What an unusual vocation. What an odd thing to be the church. A community of sinners trying to figure out what grace and hope means in a world that begs us to hate and reject everything and everyone. In the midst of all we have gone through in the world these last 4 years. Though Christianity has certainly seen its day in the sun and still has a huge amount of political privilege and power in the world, the way of Jesus rooted in love, dignity, and mercy-filled justice still remains an outlier when people consider what it means to be a Christian and part of the church. And here, on the week of my anniversary of ordination, still at the beginning of what I hope to be a long and meaningful time in ordained ministry, I don't see that position changing. That kind of Christianity, that kind of belief, that kind of following Jesus will remain edgy, while the ways of the world, proving ourselves right and never wrong, chasing unattainable standards of beauty, rampant greed, and success at all costs, continues to be the norm of the world, and unfortunately what people understand when they hear the word Christian. This way of the world, it sucks us in, even despite our best intentions and all the mindfulness podcasts we can possibly consume. The way of the world rules supreme in our jobs, in our political lives, our neighborhoods, our families, and in so many Christian churches and denominations. It is the water that we swim in. It is the middle, the norm, the average experience of humanity. And despite all of that, here we are, who don't always get it right, but when we are at our honest and very best, are just a crew of people struggling to find a different, de-centered, more on the edge answer to all that Jesus, to all with a Jesus that finds himself on the margins and not in the center of this way of the world over and over again. Despite the way of the world, its loud voice in our heads and in our hearts, we cling to the hope that one day Jesus will drag the margins, those on the outside, to the center, where they themselves, as well as the rest of the world, will know their worth. And this week's gospel text is all about that edge of hope. Jesus gets off a boat and is immediately greeted by this powerful man in the synagogue who begs Jesus to come and heal his daughter who is on the verge of death. Of course, Jesus says, "Yup, let's go." We are not going to talk much about her, but Jesus heals her. So keep that in mind. But on the way, Jesus is walking through a crowd and he is touched by a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. Or rather, she touches the hem of his robe, the fringe of his prayer shawl. And the text says, he felt power go out of him. Jesus stops and he says, "Who touched my clothes?" Other. But this was different. But the disciples urge him to keep going. The man whose daughter is about to die, I imagine, was a bit impatient. But Jesus stops and asks the question, who was that? What's going on there? That felt different than it should have. It's my Jesus. I love that. He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. The whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Now, what is the a status that maybe should have lasted a week? Still not a great thing. It lasted 12 years. The whole truth was that she had been pushed to the edge of society. The whole truth was that she had spent all of her money. And it doesn't say this in the text, but I wonder how many people in her family had stopped calling her to check in. How many of her friends had been asked for money too many times and didn't answer the door anymore, pick up their phones? How many times did they say to themselves, should we invite her to the function? It's just going to be weird for everybody. The whole truth was that her life was a mess, and she felt like she had no one and no place to go, and had been taken advantage of by a system that promised her hope, healing, and answers, a good life, but she had been left off worse. That is the whole truth. If you ever hear someone say these stories are irrelevant in today's culture, remember this story, friends. Who doesn't know medical debt? It sounds like it could happen last week. This human being, this child of God, this daughter of Abraham had been forgotten. But our Jesus stops. People trying to hurry him along, our Jesus stops. Jesus gives his time. Despite the hurry and all the important things that people are asking him to do, despite his name being able to travel far and wide with the help of this man's daughter, he was a powerful man with a large social net. Jesus stops to help somebody that the world has forgotten. Even in a crowd, even with people clamoring for his attention, in the center of his power, Jesus finds the margins, the people on the edge, and gives healing, power, love, and time. And this woman on the edge finds healing. Even on the edge of his robe, she finds life, where the edges of herself, her hands, and the edges of Jesus, his clothes, meet. And isn't that just the way it has always been? Again, these stories are not irrelevant. They are happening yesterday, and they will happen again today, and they will happen again tomorrow. Friends, the life of Jesus is found on the edge. It always has been. The way of God, it is found in those liminal spaces where we are not so sure where one thing starts and another begins. It is found in the places that the world doesn't think is worth its time, its power, its effort, its money. The face of God will be found in those faces and spaces where we just don't know, in the people we have been avoiding, where we are not sure what is happening. This has always been the way. Always. And here we are, the church, in that space still. And so many of us in the church, we are concerned about the position that we are in. We are worried that where we are is a bad thing. We're concerned that our numbers are down all over churches like ours, And we don't have the prestige of the leader in the story or his daughter. We don't have the people in our chairs and pews like we used to have. We do not know where we should go. We have lots of questions and wonders on how to fix it and no answers, and it seems like we have tried everything. And we keep trying to claw our way out of this weird position we're in. There's another way. Like Jesus, we can stop. We can pay attention, we can listen and fight for those the world has forgotten and drag their stories to the center. Like this woman on the edge, we can be thankful because in this liminal space where we don't know which way to go and we are full of uncertainty and fear, by faith, we can know that Jesus is there with us. We as a congregation, we as a church with a capital C, we find ourselves in a world with fast, certain answers, avoidant conflict, and fear-fueled panic. Just like we always have. It's always been that way. We find ourselves with all the same outward pressures not to. We still find ourselves called to stop, to listen to stories of people forgotten, and to live into the hope with Jesus and our siblings on the edge and in between liminal spaces, despite its difficulty, uncertainty, and discomfort. And we give thanks because we find ourselves in a long tradition of being where Jesus has always been, and where the gospel of love is the loudest. So let the rest of them have their power. Let them have their certainty and their hate. Let them have their fear. Let them have their siloed and small worlds, because that is the way of world and culture, and it has always been that way, but it is not for us. It is not for us. Give thanks. We are on the hem of Jesus' robe with the desperate woman. We are stopping and giving what we have. We are choosing relationships and community over pride, like so many rejected people in the church before us, and we are finding freedom from what has always been to create something new and beautiful. This has always been the way of Jesus. It is the hope of the gospel, and it is where true life must be found. Amen.